I made $20,000 in 4 days as a photographer slash content creator, whatever you want to call me. And today I'm going to give you a step-by-step breakdown of exactly how I did that. We're going to go way back to the beginning of my career. I'm going to explain what I did to position my brand in a way to where companies saw $20,000 of value in what I do. I'm going to explain what I did to network early on and meet my initial clients and eventually get to the point where these clients sought me out for jobs like this. And lastly, I'm going to go over my step-by-step checklist that I follow for productions like this so you can take this framework and apply it to your creative jobs. Even if they're not $20,000 jobs, it could be your first creative job ever. You can use this exact framework and follow it and carry it through your entire creative career because it's the checklist that I use to this day. And that is the inspiration behind today's video. I just want to share information that I wish I had when I started my creative journey in 2014. Videos like this did not exist and I had to learn a lot of these lessons the hard way, and I don't want y'all to be like me. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Evan Ramft. I'm the founder of ModernCreativeMoney.com. And this YouTube channel is for photographers out there looking to explore ideas, make money with their camera, and live a better creative life. So if that sounds like you, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. We'll talk about them a little bit later on. So step number one to this entire process doesn't even require you having a camera in your hand, and it's brand positioning. Now here's what brand positioning means. It's the action of you defining what it is your creative brand does and positioning it in a way to where potential clients see the thing that you do and say, hey, I want that person to do that exact same thing that they do, but for us. This is the most important piece of any creative career, and unfortunately, it's where most creatives get stuck. They want to do everything. Their social media is scattered, their website is scattered, there's bird photography, there's family portraits, there's city photography, street photography. That's cool if you simply want to be an artist, but if you want to be a business, you have to think to yourself, what am I selling, and who is the perfect client who is going to buy this thing that I'm selling? Once you answer that, you're well on your way to making real money with creativity. So now let's use me as an example. I'm going to explain the shift that I made to get me to the point to where I could get clients like this. It all started back in 2020. You see, prior to 2020, I made the same mistake that most creatives make. I just shared photos of everything. My social media was a little bit scattered. There was no defined thing that I necessarily did. I guess you could say street photography and city photography was my brand, but when it came to working with clients and getting contracted work, most brands didn't want you to do street photography for them. It wasn't a very lucrative opportunity. So I made one minor adjustment to my thinking and my brand positioning. I decided to take my skills as a photographer and rather than just showcasing the art that I was creating, start showcasing myself as a photographer making art. That is why if you go to my social media now, all the first photos are of me and I show more of the day-to-day life of a creative professional. It's because I wanted someone to come to my page and say, this is a human being who creates art. So early on, my brand positioning was simply just a bunch of pretty pictures. My brand positioning after 2020 became a human, a person creating art. And that is when everything changed for me because companies started to approach me and say, hey, you have a very unique set of skills here. You're a professional photographer, but you also feature yourself in the images and you clearly have the ability to tell the story of a person. Can you do exactly what you do here? Make a photo of you and then tell the story of what you're doing, but with our brand's involvement. And that is exactly what this project is right here. It's the project that I did 2 weekends ago and shared on my social media. It's primarily all the business that I get is me creating lifestyle stories for brands, essentially doing exactly what I do online for my personal brand, but for them. And it was this shift that allowed me to start getting higher paid jobs like this one because now brands approach me with a very unique problem that I solve. Typically, brands use influencers as a way to market, but these influencers don't have skills when it comes to photography and video. They essentially just use their iPhones, which is cool for promotion, but it's not cool for back-end promotion, meaning brands can't use typical influencer content in things like brochures or web ads, but they hire me to create influencer-style content that showcases the story of what I'm doing in a professional way, so then they license the photos and they get two things at once. They basically get an influencer campaign and they get a bunch of licensed marketing material that is professional that they can use. Now, this is very brand specific to me. I'm not recommending that everyone go out there and do this exact same thing. I'm recommending that you apply the exact same concept to whatever it is that you enjoy. If you like doing car photography, you want to make sure that you position yourself as someone who does high-level car photography and then start solving problems for people who need car photography photos. You just start building a business around this problem that you are solving. And like I said, this is a very nuanced topic, but I just wanted to give my personal anecdotes on how I built my brand in a way to position it to get paid this type of money. I solve a very unique problem with my photography skills and the stories that I tell and the social media type content that I create, and brands want to get a piece of that. Brand positioning is obviously very important, but it's useless if you don't do step number 2, which is actually going to get you these clients. And step number 2 is networking. But before we talk about that, I briefly want to thank the sponsor on today's video, Squarespace. If you're a creative out there looking to establish your brand, nothing is better than having a website that is clear and concise and shows potential clients what it is that you do. And no one makes it easier to build a website than Squarespace. They have a variety of drag and drop templates that you can customize to whatever you see fit. They have simple templates that can just simply showcase your portfolio, and they have more complex templates that can incorporate an online store to sell presets, to sell merchandise. And if you're someone who wants to have a website where clients can simply get in contact with you, Squarespace does that as well. And I have multiple videos on this channel breaking down a variety of different Squarespace templates and how to build a variety of sites. I'll go ahead and link them all down below. And another great thing Squarespace does is allow you to email market with your potential clients and your audience, so you can capture emails through your site and manage all your email promotions through Squarespace. So Squarespace is hooking up everyone on the channel with a free trial. Just go to squarespace.com/EvanRamp to start a trial and follow one of those tutorials I linked below. And when you're ready to sign up and save 10%, you can use code EvanRamp at checkout. That's squarespace.com/EvanRamp to start a free trial, and use code EvanRamp to save 10% when it's time to check out. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video and being a huge part of my photography business. So step 2 of this process is how you actually find these clients and how they can find you, and that is through networking. Now, in today's world, everyone wants instant results, and networking is anything but that. Networking is the process of meeting the people in the communities and in the businesses that you hope to service. It's not you going to Best Buy, buying a camera, watching this video, and making $20,000. That is not how this works. Networking is a brick by brick process, and you start by taking free work or taking $100 photo shoots and eventually moving up to $500 because your reputation begins to grow. You meet more people in your industry. Then you move up to $1,000, $2,500, $5,000, and eventually land on $20,000 plus jobs like I'm in now. Everything I have today is because of the network that I started building back in 2014. And a common misconception about networking is that it has to be in person. Obviously, interpersonal connection is the best type of connection. Let's say I meet one of y'all, we get to chatting, we have a rapport with one another, and then one of your friends needs an Instagram campaign shot for them. You're most likely going to recommend me because we have that rapport. But that doesn't mean the internet isn't a great place to network either. If you're someone who lives in a small city or a small town, or maybe the businesses that you want to service aren't located exactly where you live, being involved in the communities online that service these businesses is just as important. You can use things like LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. We saw it when NFTs got popular. Everyone who was in the NFT community was able to make sales because they had a network of people who were interested and involved in the same things that they were. So networking can be a very broad subject that's very nuanced, and you can apply it to your situation differently. And this $20,000 job 100% came through networking that I started building years and years ago. You see, back in 2018, I got approached for a job through an agency called Jackson Spalding. This was the first time an Atlanta agency ever reached out to me about doing any creative work. Their client for this job was Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola has this thing called the World of Coke, which is essentially a Coca-Cola museum. They wanted to feature a gallery of photographers who made unique photos of a special bottle around the city. Now, here's the interesting thing about this particular deal. It was completely for free. It was actually kind of a predatory deal because they wanted me to promote the gallery, promote these ticket giveaways, but I took the job anyways because I knew this was a prime opportunity to finally work with an agency in Atlanta outside of the only one that I had contacts with, which was ABV, and that was an agency owned by a personal friend of mine, Greg Mike. So I digress. I do the event. make the photos, deliver everything exactly how it's supposed to be. And the night of the gallery, I meet the photographer at Jackson Spalding named Ashton. Ashton is really respected in the Atlanta photo community. He worked at Jackson Spalding for years, creating media for Chick-fil-A, Coca-Cola, Delta, and now he does his own thing and primarily works in the automotive industry. But I met Ashton. He invited me to the Jackson Spalding office, and there I met a lot of other people who work at the agency, and I also got to see how he worked. Now, 6 months later, maybe 8 months, I can't remember, I was approached by another Atlanta agency called 22 Squared. 22 Squared offered me a job with Toyota, and you know how they found me? Through someone at Jackson Spalding. Now that leads to step number 3 of this process, which is creating a professional perception about you. You want people to perceive you as a professional. So when I got this job with 22 Squared, I treated it like the most important job of my entire life. I did everything that we're about to talk about on this list with that job, and I delivered a stellar product to them, and they came back to me a year later and we did another job like this. And then 2 years later, they approached me again with this $20,000 job. Why? All because of networking initially and then me treating the job like a professional and having the perception amongst that crew at that agency that I was someone who could deliver the job. So it is so important for you to make sure you treat every client you work with like it's the most important client of your life, and that is how you grow. So now that you've positioned your brand in a way to where people understand what they're getting from you, you've built up your network, you've met people in person, you've established that professional rapport around your business, you finally find a client. This is exactly what you want. Step number 4 is to assess the needs of this client. Now, every client is going to have different needs, and what I recommend doing is setting up a phone call with them so you can discuss exactly what they want from the project. You want to do this so you set a clear expectation of what is to be delivered and what's to be expected. There's nothing worse than delivering something to a client and it not meeting their expectations. So this preliminary call is going to establish what those expectations are, and you can discuss everything about the project and get an idea of what the deliverables will be for that project. So once you have all that information, you and the client are on the same page, you're on to step number 5, which is formulating a quote based on the deliverables that they want for the project. Now, what's really important about this step is you are not negotiating over the phone. You want to get off the phone, really sit down and figure out what you can deliver and what the fair price is for everything that the client wants. And then we'll negotiate later on in this process. So sit down, figure out exactly what the quote will be. For this $20,000 job, I dug through my emails and I found the exact quote that I sent them. Hit the thumbs up button because I had to go through a lot of emails to find this. So with this job, I quoted them 20 photos at $750 per license on those photos. So that was $15,000 right there. And then I told them from those 20 photos, I would post 8 to my Instagram story and edit them as an Instagram story that they could use later for $3,000. And I did the same thing with an Instagram post for $5,000. I told them I would create an Instagram reel telling the story of me using their product for another $5,000 and an Instagram reel license for $2,000 so the client could repurpose it and use it for different things. I lowered the price on that one because I figured how many times can a reel really be repurposed and reused. So from there, I established the quote and I went on to step number 6, which is a step a lot of people miss here, which is formulating the budget for the trip. Now, this trip had a travel expense element. I had to drive out of state and I had to have an Airbnb for this. Now, I got the cost of the Airbnb. I figured there was going to be some gas money involved. I figured there was going to be some money for food and essentials and things like that. So I worked out a quick budget for that and included it in my quote. Now, once I had everything totaled out, the $30,000 for the initial package plus the budget that I came up with, I went on to step number 7, which is sending the quote to the client. Now, that's pretty simple. You just type up an email. I recommend creating something in Canva or using a template to make it look a little bit more professional, but to each their own. You send out the quote and you wait for them to come back for step number 8, which is negotiations. Now, when I send out a quote, I like to quote the absolute max. I like to take everything we talked about in the initial call and max it out. So give them the max number of photos they wanted, the max license they wanted, all the media they could possibly use. And then when they come back to me and say, hey, this is either in our budget or out of our budget, we have room to negotiate and figure out something that works well for everyone. One of the worst feelings in the world is when you send out a quote for a project and the client comes back and immediately agrees. That means your quote was probably a little bit too low. But in the case of this project, they came back with a counter offer because their budget was only $20,000. So what we did is we sat down and we figured out what I could deliver for that $20,000 mark, and we came up with right here $500 for the photo license for 15 photos. That was $7,500. The Instagram reel plus the post plus the stories came out to $10,000, and the reel license was $2,500. So bringing the trip total to $20,000. Now, they didn't want to pay for any of the hotel budget or any of the travel expenses, which I was completely fine with. I had a feeling they were going to say no to that, so I agreed to the terms and to those deliverables we set for $20,000, and I knew I was going to eat the expense and the cost of the Airbnb, so I went online and found a cheaper Airbnb because I didn't want to cut too much into my profits from that particular trip. So after the negotiations, we need to sign the contract, which is step number 9. Typically, if you're working with an agency on a job like this, they're going to have a contract already established for you. Now, I highly recommend having someone read over these contracts because you want to make sure that everything y'all established in your preliminary emails and in your preliminary discussions is included in that contract. A lot of times companies will like to slide in net 90 payment terms, which means they pay you in 90 days. You do not want that unless you establish on your preliminary call that this is something you want. You also don't want them to slide in perpetual licenses on photos or media when you agree to 1-year licenses. That is typically things that you'll find in contracts, and a lot of times it's not even them doing it on purpose. It's because other people agree to it and then they reuse the contract and send it to you. So I recommend having a lawyer or at least someone familiar with contracts reading over these agreements and making sure you're not getting ripped off. Now, once you sign that contract, you can move on to step number 10, which is your pre-production planning. This is another thing a lot of people get wrong when they work on projects like this, and it ends up screwing them. When you are doing a project with multiple layers of media or just any deliverables in general, you need to plan how you are going to get each one of these deliverables. So on a project like this, I sat down and figured out how am I going to get the 15 photos that I have to have for these people, and how am I going to get an Instagram reel that tells the story of me making these photos. So I got on Google, started looking up locations, trying to figure out an idea of where I could make certain photos, and had a preliminary plan of how I was going to deliver those 15 pieces of media. And I did the same thing with the Instagram reel component. I storyboarded it, I figured out exactly how this reel was going to look, so when I got out on the actual production, all I had to do was execute. Now that leads to step number 10, which is to execute the exact plan that you laid out in pre-production. So on this shoot, it was a 4-day shoot. The first day I was driving in, and then I had a half day to work, had 2 full days, and then the day that I left, I had that morning to work. So realistically, I had about 3 full days. So once I got there, I immediately started working on completing the shot list that I had created in my preliminary plan. And the goal is always to get this done as fast as possible. You're not on one of these trips to have fun. You're not there to party. You're not there to enjoy yourself. You're there to create the media for the client. And I always treat it that way. So my goal every time I do a production is to get my deliverables as fast as possible via the mapped out plan that I created before the shoot. So once I do that, that leads to step number 11, which is updating the client on the progress of this shoot. This is a step that is super important to establishing that business rapport to where brands and companies know that you're serious about your job and you're treating their job seriously as well, and they're more likely to come back to you. That right there is one of the main reasons I think 22 Squared kept coming back to me for jobs year after year after year, is because I established this professional connection with them to where they knew I really cared about the project. So once you've updated the client, you're on to the next step of this process. Now, I might have numbered this list wrong, so we're just going to call this step number 13, which is to review your assets halfway into the trip. So like I said, the goal is to complete your entire shot list 50% into the production. So what you're going to do is once you're at that 50% mark in the production, you want to review everything you've done. Now this applies to 4-day shoots like this one, or even 2-hour shoots. After that first hour, you want to go through everything you've done really quick and figure out in your head, are you close to the deliverables that you mapped out, or are you not close? If you're not close, you need to take the next day or the next hour, whatever the second half of your production is, to get those deliverables. So once you've assessed where you're at, you can either improvise or you can fill in the gaps, and that is step number 14. So on this $20,000 job, I executed everything that I needed to do on my shot list at 50% of the production. So for the next half of the production, I just did anything that I thought was cool. I was creative, and I planned on over delivering to the client. this is another thing you can do to establish that professional rapport. Once you get everything on your shot list, don't just end the shoot. Do your best to deliver the most creative thing you can do and utilize that extra time. So like I said, even if this is a 2-hour shoot with a client, if you have everything you need after 1 hour, take that other hour to improvise, create, and over deliver for your client, because who knows, now that you have everything you've established, you might come up with this amazing creative idea because you're much more free from the deadline of those deliverables. So that's what I do up until the end of the production. But let's just say hypothetically that at 50% into the shoot, I go through all my assets, I review everything and think to myself, I'm way behind here. I would take that extra time that I've set aside now, that last day and a half, to make sure that shot list is filled in. So once the shoot is complete, we're on to step number 15, which is to update the client on completion. I just do this once again to establish that professional rapport with the client. Now, another thing I like to do on step number 15 is when I send that update, I like to tell them a date that I plan on delivering all the media that is farther ahead of when I know I can actually deliver it. One is to give me some extra time just in case I need it, but two, it allows me to deliver the media to them early based on my initial projections. So let's say I finish a photo shoot on Saturday. That's when the production ends. I might text the client and say, hey, everything went well. We got everything we need. I'm going to deliver these to you by Tuesday. Even though in my head, I know I can probably get these done by Monday, if I deliver them on Monday, now the client perceives me as delivering early rather than delivering on time. And I think that's always a better perception to have when it comes to growing your business. So that's what I do there. I update the client and then I expedite the delivery. All I do once I get home from a production is focus on getting it done as fast as possible and then getting it to them at the highest quality possible. Obviously, you don't want to rush, but I try to meet that deadline I set in my head. Like I said, let's say I finish on Saturday. I try to get them the media by Monday, even though I told them Tuesday, so they can perceive it as early. So that is step number 17. Step number 18 is to review the assets and deliver them and have any captions related to social media. So once you've finished everything, you need to package it nicely. I typically just do Google Drive. It's really easy. But if there is a social media component, let's say it's stories or posting to your Instagram, you also need to type out the exact captions that you plan to attach to the media so the client can approve it. And typically I recommend you reference the contract that you signed, because in that contract, it should have everything that's required of a social media post in there. So you can look at what needs to be tagged, what accounts need to be featured, and you can also make sure you're complying with any advertising rules out there that relate to social media that should be in your contract. So once you get all the assets together, once you get all the captions together, you can deliver it to the client. That's step 18. Step number 19 is them approving the media. This should be pretty straightforward, especially if you did a good job and you followed everything that was outlined in the contract. Most likely the client won't have much to say. They might want you to adjust your caption, or they might ask for another option for a photo or something like that. But typically the only time you have issues here on getting your media approved is if a client sees a legal issue from their legal department, meaning you did something or made something that could be a liability to them. That's typically when a client will come back to you and say, hey, we really need to change this. Our lawyers said it could be problematic. So once that's completed, you're on to step number 20, which is posting the actual media. Now, in my case, there are multiple layers to this. I had to post Instagram stories and Instagram posts as well as a reel. So that took a couple days. And then the client had all the photos that they licensed in the initial delivery. So that was already taken care of. So once I posted everything, I made sure to get the analytics on the post, meaning I had all the data on my Instagram stories as well as my data on the Instagram post and the reel. So I could show the client how many people viewed the pieces of media, how many people clicked it, how many people engaged with it. Now, this is typically something you see most from working with agencies, because agencies want to get all that data and package it to send it back to the big brand that they're working with. So let's use that Coke example from way earlier. Jackson Spalding might ask me for the analytical data on the post so they could create a package of how everything performed and send it to Coke so it can improve their business. Remember, if you're working with an agency, you're basically being employed by a middleman, so they're also trying to be successful and show the success of the campaign the same way that you're trying to have a successful campaign for the agency. So once you complete that, you are on to the final step, which is sending the invoice as well as sending that data to the client. That is step number 21. I have an invoice template on moderncreativemoney.com, but you can also create one on Canva or just build your own. It's pretty easy. With that invoice, you want to break down everything that was required by the deliverables that you established in those initial calls and initial negotiations. So in the case of this $20,000 project, I would break down the image licensing, the Instagram reel post, the Instagram Reel licensing, the story post, as well as the Instagram post, have everything itemized so they can see it, send them the invoice, and then from there, I wait to receive my payment, step 22. And from there, once you receive the payment, you want to send a thank you email. Sending a thank you email is once again an easy way to just establish that professional rapport. Let them know, hey, I love the project. This came out great. Y'all were really good to work with. I received my payment. Keep me in mind for any other projects like this, and just keep it going. And maybe occasionally you can reach out to them every 6 months and see if anything has come up, or just remind them that, hey, I'm willing to work with you guys on other projects like this. But once you establish that professional rapport, you deliver everything that you need, you just move on to the next one and repeat this exact same process. So that right there is a full, concise breakdown of how I made $20,000 in 4 days as a photographer and a content creator. Hopefully this video helped y'all out. If it did, let me know in the comments. Hit the thumbs up button. I'll see y'all in the next one.